G'day guys, Alex from AxePhysio here. Today I'm going to take you through a follow along athlete lower body mobility video. What that means is we're going to do it together. It's going to be a longer video, it's about 20 minutes long, and we're going to go through a full lower body mobility that you can do at home with me to target your hips, groins, hamstrings and quads. If at any point in time you feel like you've enjoyed the content you've seen here today, if you could leave me a cheeky little subscribe, maybe even like the video, I'd be very grateful. Otherwise guys, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get stuck into that video now.
Alright guys, so let's get ourselves a spot on the ground. I would suggest you have a yoga mat or a thick towel or just somewhere a little bit soft like carpet to get started. So we're just going to begin with a kneeling hip flexor stretch. What's really important with this stretch is that we tuck our pelvis underneath us. This is what we call a posterior pelvic tilt. You want to focus on tucking up the front side of the pelvis, squeezing the glutes, and this will give you a lovely hip flexor stretch at the front. What we don't want to do is arch our back too much. What this will do if we arch our back is take off the stretch from our hip flexors. The key to this stretch and any hip flexor stretch is getting that posterior pelvic tilt. If you have no idea how to find that, I do have other videos on that as well. Feel free to check it out in my video playlist. So when swapping over, out in front, making sure that we're tucking that pelvis underneath us. We're not arching through our lumbar spine. We're staying nice and still, squeezing the glutes and getting that great hip flexor stretch. As you'll see, you don't have to go too deep into the stretch to get a nice hip flexor stretch. Making sure that we're holding, we're breathing normally. So let's swap over again, 20 seconds on each side. Make sure every time we swap, we're resetting and getting that pelvis tucking underneath that posterior pelvic tilt. And let's hold this for another 20 seconds. If you are a field-based athlete, this is a really great stretch because if you have to do lots of running forwards, backwards and sprinting, you will get tight through your quads and hip flexors from time to time. So it's really important to have some form of hip flexor stretch in your arsenal for when you need to just work through that quad and hip flexor length, and this is a great variation. What you can do to make it harder is elevate the leg that's on the ground. So in this case it would be my left leg, have that up on a box or on a small little shelf. This will allow you to get a bit more of a quad stretch along with the hip flexor stretch. From here guys, we're going to transition into an adductor rock back. This is a great exercise just to work on that inner part of the thigh, which is our groin and adductor muscles. This is a nice exercise for people that do suffer from some saddle tightness. Saddle meaning our groins, our rotating muscles of our hip. These is a great little rock back. So have our hands on the ground. We sink back into the stretch. That'll give us a nice deep stretch of the adductor magnus, that really long adductor muscle. So we're rocking backwards, getting to that stretch and then coming forward. This is a nice way to open up those groin muscles on the inside of our thighs. Let's do that for about 8 to 10 reps. It's important just to take it slow. There's no need to be too quick when doing this exercise. Speed is of no importance here. Really just take your time, get your breathing right. So we're swapping over now. Let's pop the other leg out. Once again, rocking back nice and slow, really exploring the range in your hip. Now, we don't want to force pain. We don't want to force discomfort. What we do want is to, every rep, push that little bit further, but we always want to be comfortable. We are not pushing pain. We are not pushing discomfort. We are just exploring your available range in your hip. Everyone's hips are different. Everyone has slightly different range that they can have in their hip, and this is completely independent to the actual shape of your hip, the ball and socket of your hip. So leaning back, moving forward, making sure that you're exploring the range of motion that you have, 8 to 10 reps. We're now going to go into a modified prayer stretch that biases the groin. So we want to get back onto our haunches, have our knees apart, and then sitting down into this deep position. Now for some people this might be uncomfortable, so what we want to do is grab some pillows and pop them underneath our hips, or we bring our knees a little bit closer together. We come back into that deep position and we hold. and then we rock forward, opening up the pelvis. This is a great way to improve squat mobility. It's a great way to open up the anterior structures of our pelvis, so getting our lower abs stretch, getting our quads stretch, getting our hip flexors to open up. Great mobility exercise. Just continue on whilst I get into a side-on position here. We want to have our feet closer together as our knees are wider apart. Getting our glutes back onto our heels as much as you can. But if you find that difficult, that is okay. Just go to the range of motion that you feel comfortable. Once again, this is the first time you're doing anything like this. Really just take your time. We're trying to explore our mobility here. We're not trying to force anything. Personally, I find that if you just take your time and you breathe and you work through this motion, you'll be able to eventually get into deeper positions. But this may not always be possible if you're doing this recently after a game as a form of recovery. However, midweek or in the pre-season or on a week that you're feeling okay, definitely great exercise for you to be doing. So we're now going to transition out of that exercise and we're going to get into a deep hip flexor stretch. Always make sure that anytime we're doing a hip flexor stretch, we are posteriorly tilting the pelvis. That's tucking our pelvis underneath us, removing that arch from the lumbar spine. Set yourself up with your front leg outside of your hands and your leg behind you. If you have the ability, you can go up onto your toes with your back leg, but for many of us, that might be too much. So keep your knee on the ground. This will give you a nice stretch on the leg that is back behind you, but the front leg that is outside your shoulders will get a nice little modification, a nice little stretch of that front hip as well, if you're happy to drive that front leg out. So one leg behind, the other leg out in front. The inside hand of the front leg can slowly push that hip out to the side. This will give you an external rotation stretch of the front leg and a nice anterior hip flexor stretch of the back leg. Let's hold that for another 20 seconds and then we'll continue swapping sides as you need to. If you feel like you want to spend longer on this position, that is absolutely fine as well. So standing up from there, we can just rock back and forth to get some hamstring involvement, starting to work those posterior structures. If you are a field sport athlete, looking after the hamstrings is really important, so make sure we don't neglect a little bit of mobility work in our hamstrings. Too much hamstring mobility work can reduce your speed application, your ability to sprint quickly, but definitely as far as getting yourself feeling a bit nicer if you do get tight hamstrings, if you get hamstring cramp during a game, a little bit of mobility work is important as well. So 8 to 10 rocks per leg. Once you finish that, let's get on to the other side. So in that lunge position, coming forward for the right leg hip flexor stretch and then rocking back for the left leg hamstring. Great exercise just to open up that anterior thigh on one side and to loosen up that posterior thigh on the front side of the lead leg. 8 to 10 reps, just working through that range of motion. This is a lovely stretch. Because that knee is bent, you're going to get more of an inner range hamstring stretch without any of that nasty neural burning pain. So just to show you from the front, we can go back into that hip flexor stretch. We can really open up that front leg to get that external rotation. So getting back onto that first leg that you started off on, this will show you how you can open up that front leg as you're doing that hip flexor stretch. Once you've held that for about 10 to 15 seconds, we're then going to transition in a moment onto the opposite side just to open up the other leg. Making sure at all times that we're doing these hip flexor stretches that you are tucking your pelvis underneath you. This will allow you to get the most out of your hip flexor stretch. The hip flexor is attached from the lumbar spine and inserts onto that upper third of your thigh. So if your back is arched, you won't get a nice hip flexor stretch, because by having an arched back, you're actually fighting against what you need to get a hip flexor stretch. You're making the hip flexor shorter as opposed to lengthening the hip flexor, which is what you need to stretch any muscle. You need to lengthen it. So once we finish off 10 to 15 seconds on that opposite leg, we're now going to transition into our next exercise. So let's get out of that position. We're just going to come to a seated lower body position with our legs out in front. Now, we want to have our feet out in front, externally rotated, our knees are bent, and this is a lumbar spine stretch as much as it is an inner groin mobility exercise. So in this position, let's rock forward, pause and hold, reaching out as far as you feel comfortable. Now you can really change the position of your legs if you find that you're needing to have your knees straighter, if you need them more bent, if you need to have your legs completely straight, it's up to you. What we want is an inner groin stretch and definitely a lumbar spine mobility / stretch. A lot of people with groin pain will get stiff backs just because of the close proximity of the back and the groin and the pelvis. So nice and important for us to not get co-contraction, not get compensation for the lumbar spine. So let's just get some mobility, some flexion. 10 reaches, coming forward, trying to get as far as you can per reach, and we're not trying to hold our breath at any point in time that we do this exercise. Let's immediately transition into a 90-90 stretch. So this is working that internal rotation of the hip. Now please do not try to force this. Let's go with the mobility you have. Internal rotation isn't a natural movement for everyone's hip due to the morphology or the structure of your own hip. Everyone's a little bit different. It's like how some people are great at a pigeon pose but they're not good at a 90-90 stretch, and vice versa. Go to the mobility that feels, or the position that feels natural for you. Don't try to force any further than that. So let's go for 10 reps on each side. So this will be between 15 to 20 reps total, depending on how fast you go, but really just take your time. So from here, we're going to transition onto our glutes. Popping one leg up and across, we can get into a nice glute stretch. So we're just going to reach over either side. On one side, we're going to get a hamstring stretch. On one side, we're going to get a nice glute stretch. So if we go over the short leg, we're going to get our glute on that side. It's going to get a stretch. And if we go on the other side, we're going to get our hamstring and a little bit of an adductor stretch as well. Take your time, reach forward as far as you feel comfortable to do so. Keep your breathing slow. Don't try to hold your breath, and just working slowly. You can rep this out. You could do 10 reps, sliding your hands forward, breathing slowly, going as far as you can, or you can go for a static hold if this is a little bit more comfortable for you. This is really up to you and how your body feels on the day. If you want to spend some more time in that position, just pause the video for another 10-15 seconds and then rejoin us. Otherwise, we're just going to go into this cross leg groin and lower back stretch. So grabbing your feet, bringing yourself to a tall position into back extension, and then rocking back down. This will give you a back stretch as much as it will work on that groin. Let's just do 10 reps and then we'll slowly transition into a glute max stretch. So popping the leg up and across the other side. This will give you a great glute medius, glute max stretch. Slow your breathing, bending forward, and just really take your time with this stretch. If this is too much, lie flat on your back. Don't sit up into the stretch. Sitting up into the stretch will give you a greater stretch. If this is too much, lie on your back and just have your leg up and across. If you need to, you can, whilst lying on your back, bring your leg to your opposite shoulder if you are stuck in between too much and too little. For me, you can see I'm a little bit more flexible on one side than the other, so I can really come forward on my left, but not so much on my right. As I said, no one is perfect. Everyone's hips are a little bit different, so take your time when doing these stretches. So now we're transitioning into a pigeon stretch. I do quickly go into a little bit of a prayer stretch there, but we're going to get one leg up and across, sit into that pigeon stretch. Now, for some people, this is not a very comfortable exercise, and I would suggest that you use a chock or a bunch of pillows underneath your hips or your lead leg. This will elevate you off the ground and reduce the amount of stretch. Another way to modify it is to keep your leg on the lead leg a little bit more towards you and not bringing it up and across as much. There is no point overstretching. You just need to stretch to your current ability so that you don't hurt yourself and you can enjoy mobility and stretching for as long as you feel you need to. Much of stretching is just about exploring the range of motion that you have in ways that's less aggressive than when you're in the gym, which will also, when lifting weights, that does help to stretch and give you mobility in your joints. But for some people at the back end of a training week, we don't want to have as much stress on the body. So it is nice to move with less weight going through the body. So that is why mobility work is still valid as an athlete. So let's transition onto that other leg. Nice pigeon stretch there. I'm not trying to force myself down, but as I feel more comfortable, I'm going to push my back leg out just that little bit more. This is going to allow me to really get into that nice pigeon stretch. As you'll notice, my upper back is nice and straight. I'm not trying to fall to the floor and flex my lumbar spine. By keeping my back nice and straight, I'm really making sure that all the stretch is in my glutes and I'm not compensating through my lumbar spine on this one. So keep that back nice and straight. We're holding these for 20 to 30 seconds, guys. But if it's too much, you can take your time and just wait for us to move on to the next exercise. That's okay as well. On the pigeon stretch, we're going to double up here. So let's transition back to the other side and let's just get a nice long 20 to 30 seconds in. I'm going to let you guys just enjoy this next set on each leg, and then we're going to transition into some lumbar spine mobility. So guys, let's transition out of that pigeon. Let's get on our back. So I'm just going to rock our legs side to side. It's mostly for the lumbar spine, but obviously because we're moving our lower back in these lower back rocks, we will get a little bit of hip mobility as well. So try to get the outside leg to the ground and then driving that inside leg down as well, just to get over the top. About 10 of those, and then we're going to transition to a nice long lower back rotation. This is my number one favorite stretch for the lower back. Rotation is a very non-provocative stretch for just about every lower back presentation, barring maybe a couple. So you only want to go as far as it feels comfortable. Don't try to force anything and just really take your time. So let's do another 15 to 20 seconds on both sides, and then I'll join you again in just a moment and we'll transition onto another back stretch. Okay team, so we're onto our bellies now and we're coming into just a Sphynx pose. So what this is a really nice way to get some upper thoracic and upper lumbar extension. A lot of people that go into a full Cobra, which is when your arms are extended, tend to just move through that lower L4, L5 area. Just take your time and only go into the Cobra as you feel comfortable. Otherwise, stay in a Sphynx. In the Sphynx, you can elevate and go slightly higher by using some chocks or some pillows. As you see here, I'm in a Cobra, however, my stomach could be a little bit more on the ground. This will allow me to move through those upper levels of my lumbar spine. If you find that with your hands in too close to your body that you're arching too much, have your hands further apart. This will allow you to really arch your back less and have more control over how much range of motion you want to arch into. So either on your forearms or on your hands, and either hands in close or hands further away from the body. This will allow you to really get a good grasp on how much you want to actually go through extension in your back. I like to think of my whole back extending. I'm not just extending through one joint. So take your time exploring this range of motion. Increase it as you feel comfortable, but if you find it's too stiff in one area, just give yourself some time and work into it slowly. We're now transitioning to the end of our stretch. We're just going to come into this nice sleepy pose, really trying to flex our back as much as possible here. Once again, I'm not really sure what to call this one, but this is just one of my favorite finishing stretches. I'm really just trying to be as relaxed as possible here. My breathing's nice and slow. I'm really flexed through my lumbar spine. I'm just taking my time, spending as long as I need to spend here, and really just trying to get my breathing right, trying to not let my back be too active. Once again, feel free to pause the video and stay in this position if you need to. Otherwise, we're going to step up, get onto our feet. We're going to finish the session off by just doing some standing forward folds and forward reaches. We're going to stay in this position for as long as we need to, and we can rep it out as many times as we need to. This is entirely up to you and how you feel. Make sure you do it with bent knees. You don't have to keep your legs straight. Straighter is not better. The more flexion and folding in your lumbar spine is what we're after here. Stay in this position as long as you want, guys. I really appreciate you joining me today. This is my first follow along video. If you would like to see more of these, please let me know in the comments. And if you really enjoyed it, subscribe for more content. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next video.